I really appreciate y'all coming all the way down to this farthest corner of the VBC to join us tonight. I think you're going to be glad you did. Our consultants, the folks who are the professionals when it comes to redeveloping and designing downtowns, Urban Design Associates out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They have done work in downtowns really throughout the world, and they know what it takes to help a downtown grow in a quality way, in a sustainable way, and really take advantage of the things that make every downtown unique. As we've been going through our master planning process, we get the question on occasion, is Huntsville going to be the next Chattanooga? Is it going to be the next Austin? Our answer is always, we want it to be the next Huntsville. What is it that makes Huntsville so special? What is it that makes it so amazing? How can we take advantage of those things, and how can we play them up? And downtown, healthy, vibrant, interesting downtown is really a key to that. So UDA has come in and they have been busy all week. We're supposed to have 2 public meetings, sort of drop-ins, because of the tremendous amount of tornadoes that we had last night. We didn't have one last night, we had one Tuesday. But they've been talking with the public all week, a lot of times in drop-ins. They've been meeting with property owners and residents and stakeholders downtown and really fleshing through some ideas, really figuring out how, as downtown Huntsville continues to grow, how can we take advantage of it? How can we make sure that it happens in a constructive way? And how can we make sure that it benefits everybody who considers downtown a resource? So with no further ado, I want to get to the interesting stuff. I'd like to introduce Rob Robinson. He is the president, is that your official title? Emperor of Urban Design Associates, also known as UDA. He's going to talk through really what they've been working on and float some ideas for you, kind of get an idea of what the design team is thinking. And then we're going to spend the back end of this meeting adjourned next door, and we're going to talk through a lot of these ideas and give you a chance to respond to some of the stuff we're thinking about and weigh in again. So with no further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Rob.
Hey, thanks. We've been thinking about that a lot over the last few months as we've been coming to Huntsville. We were here about a month ago. I don't know how many folks attended that one, that open house. And then we've been back for a week. Our group is a little bit like a theater troupe. We come in, we set up, we have an open studio. We were up in UG White on Clinton Avenue. It was fantastic. They were great hosts for us. And then invited folks in. We've had one-on-one meetings, we've had group meetings, people drop by and help us think about what are the kinds of things that are going to make a difference as this downtown evolves. So you guys are in a really amazing cycle, I'd call it a cycle, in what's happening in downtown Huntsville. And our mission was to come in and take a look at everything going on, and from our vantage point as urban designers, and working with lots of different scales of cities and towns, and to sort of see what makes sense over the next 5-6 years in a way to prioritize and begin to focus investment and with the private sector and the public sector, so that what you have started here, that we can create a little campfire and bring more things to that campfire to keep it burning brightly. So this image is I think your sort of inner self. You guys have a lot of fun here. You use the city in many different ways. Also, you have great resources here and events and programming, and really taking advantage of all the marvelous things that are not only in the region, but things within the downtown. So pop-up festivals, events, and just kind of interesting things to do is what cities have become all about recently. We didn't used to do this. We never did this stuff. You might have a parade, you might have a concert or something, but this whole idea that even little daily rituals and then events on a regular basis and programming is important to our quality of life has proven to be really effective and really, I think, a great transition in the way we used to just kind of be hands off. So you had a master plan in 2006. You've been doing a lot of stuff. Investments coming in, things are changing, and these sort of efforts need a little glue, we think. How do you really effectively grow in a way that's coherent, and the next investment reinforces the one before it. Not always easy when it's lots of different people and lots of different property owners and lots of different agendas for development. So we're meant to look at that and try to understand how best we can help. A lot of the ways the city can help is really supportive infrastructure, and also being the kind of policy-making body that allows things to happen in a fairly streamlined way, and try to uncomplicate the process as much as you can. These collaborative opportunities, you have a long history of public and private development initiatives that have yielded really great stuff over the last number of years. So thinking about how we go forward with that is important. And then, you know, it's all about creating a vibrant downtown so that you do effectively compete for talent. At the end of the day, it's got to be a great place to live and a great resource for folks, but it's also how you guys have to recruit the brightest minds in the world to come here and work. You're doing that day in and day out. So it's an amazing story, but people have very, very high standards these days, right? So they look at you and they look at you in context with other places. So it tends to be with this generation, you know, it has been for a little while, that we're starting to choose place almost more than job. And if the place is great, we'll find a way to work there. So when you get the talent into Huntsville, how do you keep it, and how does the downtown play an effective role in that? So when we were here before and listening, and we'll do that again tonight, because we're like testing ideas. You know, we're in the middle of the movie right now. We came a month ago, and people were helping us write the screenplay. And here we are, you know, shooting different scenes, seeing how it works, testing ideas, and we do it by drawing. And, you know, some of this you'll see is diagrammatic, but then we get into, okay, what are you guys talking about? Like, what is it going to feel like? What's it supposed to be? So we like to illustrate what we think we hear, and we hope for feedback so that we use drawings as a way to communicate so that we can dial it, you know, one way or another, because as Dennis said, no, you're not the next Chattanooga or the next Nashville or the next anything. You're Huntsville. And how do you grow as a place that is uniquely Huntsville? That's really hard to do because you can become generic really quickly just by the way development works these days. So it's we sort of walk that line. So we try to capture that when we talk about any kind of new development, new investment in downtown. How does it really belong in Huntsville's downtown? So what we did here is a loud cry. These are consensus points. You can go online. There are like hundreds and hundreds of comments. But where there was the most agreement is this notion that we inherit a downtown today that, while it's changing, it has been through what I'd call some rough times for a downtown. And it's not much different than many other cities and towns in the country. We went from a place where we walked and lived close together, in close proximity to work and shopping, to where we drive. And what has happened over the years is that you've clawed away at these tiny little blocks, and it's become a really different place. And this notion of what makes a downtown work, why would you want to walk there? Why would you want to live there? It's a very different kind of environment. So how do we begin to restore these connections that have been lost? And when I say connections between buildings and streets and parks and new development, it's a really important thing. So making downtown streets delightful places to walk, that seems like a worthy goal to me. And we find when we're talking to people here that folks say, well, I'll walk through the park, but there's nowhere to go, and you know, I'm not biking here because it's like crazy traffic and people go fast and the streets are big. I'll bike somewhere else out in the country along a trail, but not in downtown. And that, we got to change that. That's not a good thing anymore, because we're asking a lot more out of mobility and the way we live in places, and it's got to be human scale and in balance. And I think there's a great opportunity to do that. This idea too, and this is, emerged relatively recently over the last decade and a half, perhaps, where people want their downtowns to be connected to the great outdoor spaces and to other neighborhoods in ways that are easy. So, and that also includes enhanced mobility. I want to be able to bike, into Montesano, or, down to the Tennessee River, or out to the West End. You got to be able to do that. People are asking it of their cities and of their places, and it's an important component these days in being able to attract new talent as well. So that's a big one. The other one was there's enormous pride and love for Big Spring Park in the middle of town. I think it's one of the great parks in American cities in the form of it and the way it fits into the urban fabric. So it's being renovated now, which is beautiful. One of the things we notice about the park is it's actually not the center of civic life here. Hardly any building faces that park. And the hallmark of great parks are buildings and pedestrian spaces that front it. It's your front door, it's your living room, it's the place where people gather. It's got to be, it's got to be something that we all respond to when we begin to redevelop and build new within the city blocks. So that's important. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then there's this notion that everybody who comes here, when you come to a performance here or a hockey game or something like that, when you leave, and you leave in the evening, a lot of them are in the evening, you walk out to Monroe Street, you see a low, dark, gigantic garage, and you never pass beyond it. So there's really no downtown for folks 800,000 people who come here a year. And I dare say, less than a handful of people will ever walk across that park into downtown. A, people say there's nothing to walk for. That's not true. That's changing now. And B, it feels like it's a light years away from here, yet it's pretty darn close. I walked here in 5 minutes. So it's all about the quality. So this whole idea of bringing this place into the heart of the city, we think is an important element as we move forward. Access to parking, oh my gosh. You guys have parked about every square inch you can park, and still there's not enough. And it faces cities big and small, and we chase it. We chase it all the time. So you can't really develop at any density unless you can park it, because we're all still driving. That's not going to go away anytime soon. But it changes the scale of any impact on the ground. You spend much more of your land resources on gravel and asphalt parking lots than you do on buildings today. So when we do an analysis of the city and we look at it, and you'll see some of those drawings, it's astonishing, that pattern. Yet there's never enough parking because it's not in the right place, or you don't own it, or you don't share it. So that's a funny thing that will still be a kind of issue over time until the paradigm shifts. And baby, is it shifting as fast as anything. I mean, cities and the way people are using cities and the way people are using cars and the way we're commuting to work or going to meetings is not going to be, we'll be here 5 years and it'll seem like that was 1860, what we talked about today. So we need to anticipate what's happening in our culture and in the future, yet we need to accommodate what's going on today and make it work and transferable for the future. So this notion of having active uses on the ground floor and fun things to do, that's all part of the redevelopment pattern. So we want it to act like a neighborhood. And I think, we used to be the central business district, right, the downtowns. But when you look at Huntsville, which is so closely associated with the old neighborhoods like Old Town and Twickenham and everything that just sort of melds together, it was all one thing. And then over time, residential really left the downtown here. In my own city, Pittsburgh, we never lived downtown. We always lived in our neighborhoods. But now, guess what? Downtown's a completely different ecosystem of folks living and working, and the weirdest places that you would have never imagined a few years ago. So that's fun stuff, but it's a really different place, and it makes us think about the way we wire it up and put things together in a very different way. You can't predict too far down the road there. So one of the, and this is sort of it must have been floating around here, it was sort of a project, or people got scared when they really took a good look at the building. City Hall, you can't strap it together much longer. I think it was a beautiful building in its time, and it's an interesting artifact, but it has reached the end of its life, starting to be decanted, some of the annex portions of it, and it's a really tough building to reuse. So it's about time. The City Hall parking garage is also on its relatively last legs. I mean, you can park there this week, it's okay. But, before it goes too much longer, it's clear that needs to be rebuilt. So the whole idea of moving City Hall and redeveloping there is like a game board piece that we want to look at, because we think it's in the next 5-year window. So what happens on that side of Big Spring Park could be really interesting, we think. So this idea of making the downtown walkable, particularly from here to downtown, people are interested in doing something with the vacant land that they see around in some fairly large tracts. And then this whole idea of can buildings look like they belong in Huntsville if they didn't land here from Pittsburgh or Mars or Charlotte or Chattanooga or somewhere else. What we're seeing is what you're getting here, which is this working and living in downtown is becoming a fundamentally different proposition in many cities. Different kinds of businesses want to locate in downtowns than before. We were most always financial and legal centers. That's sort of across the board. But that's changing, and this lifestyle is and folks who want to be here, they want to do stuff all the time. And you mix your daily routines, and they want to work and live in spaces that are very cool and interesting, and sort of supportive of a life that they want to live. You've got a lot of the stuff that people want. They want to be social. These are and people move here because they want to be social. Otherwise, you take a different path. So the body language of streets and how we start using public space and in very many different ways, and pop-up stuff that happens one week is gone the next, that's kind of what's going on in a lot of places around the country. And then this idea, and you already use your city that way, as you are the regional gathering place. It's still your downtown. That hasn't moved away from you, and you guys are really good at doing that. So that culture, this is the culture we're dealing with today. It's really different than in the past, and I think it's important to understand. So if it's the people and the kind of businesses that want to be here, we find that in Huntsville, as we look at this cross-section between the folks who are in the research parks and working with the DoD contractors and in the arsenal and doing all this amazing work, have also been spinning off little babies. There are tiny little firms that are becoming their own entrepreneurs and taking ideas into commercialization, wanting to do different things. Repeats itself in every kind of high-tech center, whether it's Washington or San Francisco or Boston or Raleigh or you name it. That is what's ginning up in our cities. This creative, what would be called Richard Florida, a kind of creative class. It is the group that wants to land. So I wanted to introduce Brian, who works with Hawkins Partnership in Nashville, and Brian and Kim were on a team with us to do the Nashville master plan update in Sobro in the beautiful new park along the river there. But Brian has been studying and working with this whole niche industry that we find cities dealing with, and there are very specific things to nurture and begin to grow these kinds of businesses here. So Brian, why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
I mean, Huntsville has so many amazing resources, and the talent depth here But cities and companies particularly are starting to understand that they've for a long time have been thinking internally about their innovation strategies, and now they're starting to see the benefits of bringing as the city as a tool, as a part of that innovation strategy, because it's a way to connect people, and what we're learning is the more we have these social connections and building these social networks within a city, the ideas and things that come out of that and those relationships create new ideas, and it's kind of the basis of all of this. And I mean, you've been seeing a lot of that going on in Huntsville over the years. I mean, you have a cluster here that is enormous, and the relationships here are what keep people in the region. That's what attracts people to the region. That is one of your biggest competitive advantages are the resources that you have. But there are other, across the country, as people begin to look for these cities that are able to connect individuals, and what we're talking about is getting out, when we're talking about these pedestrian environments, these bicycle environments, where people are out of their cars, the chances of them bumping into each other and having those discussions are greatly enhanced. But one thing that we really love about learning about Huntsville is just the resource. It's less than 5 miles away. This huge, enormous amount of intellectual capital and all the resources that are over there. But from that, the downtown has begun to be that place for that other alternative. And so it's about creating an additional product that Huntsville has to offer to compete with other types of companies that want to come here. So it's not about competing internally or within the region. It's about, like what Rob said, about these other cities that are creating these innovation districts, is often referred to. And what they don't have is they don't have these other great resources. And so by putting those all together, we really feel like there's a lot of potential. And so you're starting to see in the downtown clusters already starting to develop with 200 West Side Square being one of the highest density areas, as well as the Times building. And just looking at the walking radius, this is a 1/4 mile radius, you start to see where those start to overlap. And right in the middle of it, you start to see Washington Park, Clinton Row. I mean, all those things that are happening. I mean, it's truly magical what's going on in that little block. And we're going to talk more about what can be done to build off that. But it's a wonderful asset to have, because people are wanting to. It's kind of like an accidental innovation. It's where it's embedded into the lifestyle, where it is just everybody working together, whether it's a hobbyist that's just wanting to explore new ideas, or if it's a new entrepreneur. But these places that you're already starting to nurture, the Huntsville Downtown Inc. doing a wonderful job of beginning to orchestrate those activities and recruiting people to come down within that. And just from their tech tour, I wasn't able to join on that, but I heard it was really amazing, and so many vibrant conversations just happening. But it can be organic, and you're already starting to see some of that there, but there's a lot of components to to kind of nurture those types of environments, and ensuring that the resources are in place, or that those relationships are built. I mean, frequency is one of those really important aspects of building those relationships. And so when you're seeing with the co-working nights that you have weekly, and those are those types of events that are bringing those people together. But looking at how do you support the people, because you have the talent, and people want to be coming to Huntsville because of the amazing things that are happening here. If it's in the field that I'm interested in, this is the world-class place to be for it. But the idea of it being first an enabling environment, one that's really welcoming entrepreneurs and creating an environment that just has that entrepreneurial spirit, and the city itself is doing that. One thing that we're really focused on over the last couple of days is really the physical environment. We want to ensure that we have a lot of the infrastructure, what we refer to innovation infrastructure, in place, so that you have that as you continue to grow, that you have the certain office space sizes, floor plates and those types of things to accommodate the growth, or to make sure you have other types of facilities that are needed. We don't really touch on the capital. Obviously, capital is one of those big things. You have a lot of large companies here, and you know, just even internally investing in startups. And then the networks. I mean, again, the co-working night, but how kind of making sure that all these people are talking to one another and making sure that that infrastructure is in place that allows them to do that, and of course, talent. Networking events, I mean, again, that's one thing that we've heard, is making sure that there is a clubhouse, I mean, a place where this is the center of all of the action going on, to have those events within the downtown is really important, and a place to hang out and to promote all the great innovation that's going on in all parts of Huntsville, to recruit people when they come to Huntsville. But then creating buildings that are exposing that to get people excited, especially when you're bringing in for recruiting, or just somebody passing along the street and being able to know what's going on, and you know, connecting ideas. It's just the excitement of all that going on along those edges. Of course, office space, all different types, different sizes, whether it's a co-working space or it's large office plates, being able to accommodate that. And then you just have these other unique spaces that where you have a lot of hardware companies that are building things and making sure that they have those spaces to work, or whether it's a maker space of some sort to where somebody that needs those tools has access to them to lower that barrier. But cities have really seen this as a way to nurture homegrown companies and having that as their economic development strategy. But you're going to see that over the next, the rest of the presentation as we talk about the physical environment and how this kind of all gets integrated in there. But it is all about connecting people and making sure that infrastructure is in place.
Thanks. We think you've got that in the middle right in the middle of your downtown. It's already happening. It's well on the way. And so how do you nurture that with what we do going forward, and how do you bring more people into the mix? So along Clinton and Holmes, you'll see between there, from one side of east side of downtown, working towards the west, towards here, there are a lot of these companies already in place, so let's take advantage of it. So, our interest here, as we look at initiatives that we think are important over the next 5 years, a lot of it's about improving mobility here, creating a bike-friendly city, and getting those two things together so that we can create a kind of efficient pattern that happens in downtown. Our sense is that in the next 5 years, you need an interim solution, to a lot of this. Don't go building a lot of stuff, all at once. It's really hard to do. It saps all your resources, and it makes you slow down. So we've been thinking a lot about how we sort of get people to resources, because the one thing that's a little scary that we find is that people don't really want to walk 2 blocks, 3 blocks, tiny blocks to where they're parking. So, that's going to change. It just is slow, but it's going to change. So we think things like a circulator through the downtown. We did a very similar thing a bunch of years ago in Norfolk, Virginia. That is the most car-crazy region in the country. In Tidewater, Virginia, nobody commutes in public transit much. So it was hard. And we sort of kind of figured the same thing with the city as they were looking at the price tag for building what they thought was a deficit of almost 3,000 parking spaces in their downtown. So as we looked at the number for building new structured parking, we realized that the remote lots, nobody was parking in those. And so we did an electric shuttle that ran one route every 5 minutes in the morning to get to work, got you to the medical district, got you downtown, same in the evening. And that took enormous pressure off of that chasing parking all the way through the city until, it matured and we can kind of find out what's going on. This was before Norfolk had anybody living downtown. Today it's 3,000 people plus who've come into that little town. And it's stuff like this that makes that possible. So we think there might be a kind of circulator loop along Clinton and Holmes. Already the hospital has run this system, has run it for years, stopped, and now is running it again. And in meeting with them, that provides us a really good model for how they're addressing that same issue about supportive infrastructure. So it can come in many different ways. Is it ideal? Would you rather have that parking space right beside your office door? Yeah, but guess what? You know, we can't really get that anymore in this environment. So how do you accommodate the need for proximity and efficiency and time? So the idea about transit as a kind of piece of your future was one thing that sort of rose to the top. The other thing is this idea of transforming your streets. And we're all trying to figure it out in cities now. We're all trying to figure out how to take what was only an automobile realm and make it safe for cyclists, make it safe for pedestrians, and enhance mobility and not detract from it, and create a different context for folks in the way they use downtowns. So we started looking at your system here, the red ring and all the arrows. That's Monroe, Williams, and then Lincoln on the eastern side. And then all those arrows that are pointing out are connections to these adjacent neighborhoods, Clinton, Holmes, and Gallatin, and Church Street. So where the red is, we're proposing that you transform those streets and add bike lanes to those, bike infrastructure. Oh, I bet my power's going out. And, you know, it's as easy to do with green spray paint, nope, the other one, thanks, as it is to do with, it'll get back in a minute, with a lot of building. This is not right now a proposal to go rip everything up and rebuild your streets. All of these proposals are within your existing streets and curb lines, so you're not having to rip stuff out. Are you taking another lane of traffic out on some of these streets, on the big ones, Monroe, Williams, Church? Yeah, you are. Are you adding on-street parking? We think that's a great idea, so that you actually increase the parking resource and proximity, and at the same time you slow down traffic and make it more pedestrian accessible. The other thing that this system mixes with is the sort of green curly stuff, which would be the greenway systems that are being developed and thought about in Huntsville. So there's the Pinhook Creek Greenway on the west side that you see on this side of the screen, and we're proposing that Big Spring Park be a kind of center for how the greenways come in. Spraggins, which is a little street that comes through the middle, goes right to Big Spring Park at grade, become another connection to the greenway going north. So it is something that you can test, you know, which is, we've sort of learned this over the years, that the first thing you do, we did it in our city, we did it for the G20 summit. When it came to Pittsburgh, we wanted to be cool. We had no, you know, dedicated cycle tracks. So overnight, I swear, overnight, you came in the next day, you know, they took a lane of traffic out, it was all painted green and little plastic bollards, and it was a test. You know, we test that to see how it works, and if it doesn't work, we take the paint off and change the idea of what we're doing there to make it work a little bit better before we add any serious infrastructure that is a bit more difficult to remove over time. So we think that this fits in really well with what you're investing in the region in terms of open space and greenways. And for us, getting greenways connected into the heart of the downtown and with your street system would be transformative for the city. So we take a look. I won't go through all of these. This is Spraggins today. Little street that is, 3 and 4 lanes as you go down there. There's like you can lie down in the street and take a nap about any time of day. This is not a through street, but it's the one that goes right to the park, and the top one you can see you're headed straight for Big Spring Park. So the idea is to take that street today and begin to add bicycle infrastructure and also additional landscape on the inside of those existing curbs, so you can create protected parking, but you also narrow the scale and enhance the character and quality of it. Same for Clinton. That was converted to a two-way street a couple years ago, working just fine. And yet it's still a gigantic cross-section as you come into town. And when you look at the traffic numbers and you begin to assess it, that we got a lot of capacity here. And it's sort of your main street. It changes, going out to Campus 805, and the idea that I can bike between that center that's emerging in downtown, and then from there to 5 Points and up into the state parks is pretty special. So just being thoughtful about that. And in this one, this has not the bike lanes on either side, but we consolidate it. So you have what's called a cycle track. You take out a lane, and then there's a lane of parking and 2 moving lanes of vehicles that go through the heart of this district. So that becomes a kind of intimate little street, can carry the traffic, not a problem, but also makes it much more pleasant and much safer to walk on. Then you got the big kahunas that are like surrounding the city, and they were designed to do this. You know, if you have to tap your brakes, that's not such a good thing for a lot of people, but if you live in this city and it becomes a place where lots of activity is going on, all ages, doing things in the city, this is not great. This does not breed, you know, a really intimate and delightful kind of environment. So it's these streets where I think you have the most opportunity to transform the feeling of them. And those are simply to begin to, again, install that kind of bike infrastructure, get parking on the streets again, and reduce that to 2 lanes where you can do it. So it's not the same everywhere. You know, Williams and Monroe changes, so there are a series of different treatments. But again, all within your existing street infrastructure. So we think those are going to be important for the city as you move forward, and you can see the full inventory in the other room. Now, this slide is just highlighting, we do these little drawings called X-rays where we just sort of look at one thing or the other. And this shows us all the retail uses in red in downtown. It ain't a lot. It's a fragile little system, and a lot of this is brand new. And a lot of this is, you know, we have to thank Chad for helping conceptualize how to reuse something like an old city garage as a new address for lots of little shops on Clinton across from the great place where we were working, UG White. And, you know, it is, you can see with the buildings and these little businesses that for them to survive at this point, I mean, you don't have a lot of folks living downtown, so they don't get the everyday traffic in the week that they need to survive. So we think we need to make sure that whatever we do early, we're helping all of these new investments and local businesses that have clustered around this sort of center of the corridor. So why do you come to a downtown? Why do we all go to a downtown? You know, we want to be entertained, and we want to have, you know, interesting things to do and see, and multiple things. You don't just go for one thing all the time. So this pattern needs to grow in the heart of the city for Huntsville to be resilient and for businesses to survive. The other reason people come into town is for facilities like this. Be a great concert here, or a hockey game, or a conference. And Big Spring Park, people come to be part of that park, and the art museum, the children's museum, Constitution Village, the roundhouse that's up in the north, all of those green and purple dots are civic destinations that are in the downtown. The problem is, when you look at this, is that just what we talked about, if we're in the Von Braun Center now, the only way we're going to the roundhouse to an event afterwards is we're getting in our car and we're driving up there. And these things are very disconnected in the city. But when you look at it, you start to see that, in a way, much of it is sort of proximate and coincident to each other. So in the sort of first tranche of thinking about what we need to do, those opportunity sites, which you see in the dark red overlaid there, in that what we call the Clinton Homes district, we need to make this a great precinct to walk around in. You need to be able to make a block and it feel good. You know, it's like got to be a neighborhood. It can't just be one building, you get in the little parking lot, you drive out of there. That is not, that's not going to be sustainable. So whatever we do here is getting the investments that are proposed, and there's a lot of stuff people want to do here right now to follow on, is to make sure that buildings are addressing streets and adjacent buildings and scale and character so that it makes a great place. And I will say the investments you've had in the Avenue and Belk Hudson and buildings like that, those are terrific. And I think they're really well done, and they fit into the Huntsville kind of ethic. So when we blow it up and you look at the patterns, you see, and they're generally colored. Orange is kind of residential, blue is an office use, and if it's a little bit more red, it's a commercial or retail use. And so we've got this mixed pattern all around, and you see this tiny grid pattern that you inherited from a long time ago. So that stayed intact pretty well. This is about half the size of a normal city block system. So it's neat because blocks are really walkable and it's fun and you get a lot of little stuff, but it's really darn hard to develop and piecemeal and incrementally and try to park it. So you get as much parking as you get buildings. But when we think about the available sites and what people have told us they want to do and are ready to develop, and then opportunities, we think that there's a very focused little strategy in the heart of that Clinton Homes corridor. And it's right, do you know where Washington Park is? And that little alleyway that goes to that block? That's this, it's just adjacent to where the avenue was developed, which is, if you can see my light, it's right there. So that's a brand new investment, and folks will be moving in, some shops on the corner. This is the block we're talking about. This is Washington Park going through. That's Humphreys in the back there. This is UG White right here. And then there's the Clinton Road shops on the corner. So anything that's colored is a new investment. So there's a corner of that block that hasn't been developed, just one corner. But we think it can be one of the most transformative opportunities in the city. Get the place to be a whole place, and then let's extend the idea of what can go on there. So if you look at it in a bit more detail, you see the idea of extending this sort of what I call a third place, a little printer's alley address through the middle of the block, and then continue that to the next one. So you got a whole little hidden world that's within this tiny world already. So you've got street retail, and you've got courtyard and alley kinds of environments. So there it is from the air. And so we see the corner parking lot. When you look at the yellow building just on the head of it, that's the federal courthouse and post office, which will be moving to a site over close to this center. And there's a proposal for redeveloping this. So, how does this process work? So if you really love those kinds of addresses, we think they can be pretty special and something that people would come from all over the region to participate in if it's cool and fun. But you've got to be very explicit with anybody who wants to develop in these blocks to say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. When you develop and design a building, it needs to address both sides. It's a really different thing. And if it's not overt and it's not explicit, 99 times out of 100 it's not going to happen. At the same time, we have the chance to rebuild that City Hall face along Big Spring Park. And it gets back to this idea of putting active uses on the park and buildings facing the park and creating a kind of front door. So when we look at the sites, what you see, if you know that area well, there is the City Hall parking, the city parking garage. That's the one that's not long for this world. And then there's the City Hall building, the annex, and then there's the engineering building, used to be the old library, right across from Early Works, and another BBT garage and the AT&T building. Big Spring Park is here. And then there's that edge of the park. This is Fountain Circle Street here. And it creates a kind of lasso around that garage. So when you look at it from Big Spring Park and you see the City Hall complex, the original building, and then the later additions in the annex and the garage. When those go away, those sites go away, one of the ideas here is do this in a way that expands the park and creates a new address along that southern side, build parking resources for those buildings. They would be either built by the private developer, by the city hall for their site to accommodate those uses, and then create new building frontage along the park. One of the things we found when we were sort of studying this is that we think you can get a park promenade along that south side, so I can walk from Church Street in front of the buildings up into the square as a parallel access to that beautiful meandering walk along the canal, and then up the stairs into the square. If we look at a rendering, so we talked about the City Hall going from this idea of creating a new south face and marking the corner of Church Street at the park. When you look across the park, right now it feels really far away. So let's use building massing and scale. That's a kind of a big street in there to start thinking about the best form for buildings to form that edge of the park and how that might work. So in this one you see City Hall at the top, and then a new mixed-use building at the bottom of the hill towards Church Street, and the promenade that sort of extends Fountain Circle right in front of those buildings, so you have another way up and in to the square and into downtown. So we think that, you know, along with what's happening in the Holmes and Clinton district, that this Fountain Circle opportunity is going to be near term, and I think could be pretty transformative for the way you feel about your entry into the city on Church and the sense of public place in the park. So you can see the little plan. You know, these are pretty faceted little projects and little initiatives that we think can work, and over time we think the frontage along Williams at the bottom will redevelop as we talk to folks there and their interest in changing that form. So this is at today, you know, on Church Street when we look at the bottom of that. And this is kind of the problem with what happens here, where you turn your service entries and your blank walls to some of the major portals, ways through town. So that's something we can, you know, we can address with the next iteration of whatever goes on that site to make sure we get active uses there all the time. The last, or the third district is what we call the VBC district. We didn't start out with this as an idea, but this perplexing, you know, situation where this is in the city, but it's so far removed from where the action is, how do you change that dynamic and create some active frontage as well so that we can connect things up? So we wanted to bring downtown to the VBC, and that was the idea of transforming Monroe. You see Monroe Street going through now. There's the giant parking garage right on the other side from the front entry. Big Spring Park frontage here as you walk along the garage, and empty sites along Clinton as you come into town. So if you come out of a performance here, there's nothing fun and friendly greeting you, and it doesn't, you know, you got to go somewhere else to have something to do. Yet it's you know, it's a well-traveled street, and it's one of the most active places in the city when there are events going on. So we think that there is this is an old idea. This idea has been around a long time. We won't claim any credit for this, but it's a good idea. So let's talk about it, and we think that now might be the time where it could work for you. And this idea involves rebuilding a bit of this older part of the garage and lining it with active uses that face the park. So rather than you walking along a blank wall, that there'll be, whether it's little live-work units, little office uses along there that take advantage of being in the garage and take advantage of overlooking the park, that you create, again, the sort of front doors to the park. And if I'm coming out, then I've got an opportunity, whether it's hotels and restaurants and uses that really serve an event place like this would be completely awesome, we think. So it's one of those ways we think at the middle that big site and that big garage could actually be a pivot and connect the sense of the city, bring that sense of the city to this site. So we're on Monroe looking north towards this complex, and that would be on your left-hand side, the front entrance. This is the parking entrance on the corner, right at the park. That would go away. The parking entrance would be changed, and that would become a building site. And we would line Monroe right across from the VBC. So now you come out, you're in downtown, you only come here to the hockey game or a special event. You walk out the front door and Monroe becomes a very active street. Again, you notice there are bicycles in there, there are cars, there are people. And we think this is a big deal for you to be able, and for businesses here to be able to tap into what's going on this side of the city. Because these giant convention centers are hard in any city to kind of melt it into a district and make it human scale. So we're sort of excited about this idea that's been around for a bit, and we'll drag it back out and tinker with it a little bit and see if it's something that you think can work for you. And then there's this notion of the Northwest Gateway. There's some existing residential housing up in that northwest corner, up against the Five Points ditch on that side and crossing the Pinhook Creek right along that western edge. And then these are the large tracts of vacant land. It was the old Coca-Cola bottling plant, and a little bit of the housing was demolished years ago. And then the area around the Roundhouse, as you get up to the Washington and Jefferson corridor, we think that there's some opportunity sites for something there as well. And over time, we think this is a little bit longer. We're excited about the whole idea of getting a much larger residential district in the downtown. You don't have enough folks living down here. You have folks living close, but not within walkable distance, and we think it provides a great complement to the eastern edge where you have Old Town and Twickenham that come right into the downtown. So if you start to look at that pattern, on this northern edge of the Von Braun Center, we think that you can develop in a very productive way mixed income, mixed use housing, preserve affordable housing in the city, bring in some more so that there is a lot of opportunity for everyone. And that's the thing we sort of forget, and it's coming back to catch us in many of our cities that are developing, is that anything you do develop, it's darn expensive. It's expensive to develop, it's expensive to rent, it's expensive to buy, and it leaves out a lot of the segments of the population that really want to be here and could have amazing synergy with what goes on in the downtown. So if we go to that edge, let me go back on Clinton, on the other side of VBC, we're kind of standing right at that intersection looking across the street. And today that is the Huntsville Utilities parking lot. It's in the very heart of the city. So that's a great opportunity site for a lot of things. One is, yes, you can provide more parking than the surface lot, but more importantly, you can provide active uses on this front door into the city along Clinton. So on those sort of 4 initiatives, if you will, this idea of capturing the west side of the city and really pulling it in, and then making great street spaces throughout the downtown, we think will be extremely beneficial over the coming years. And it's what you want to talk to your development community about. It's the way you want to build a city. It's not, forget about use sometimes. It's really the way buildings interact and create great public space. So we're excited about those sort of strategy elements. You can't do everything at once, right? So you got to pick what you can do and move through it, and prioritizing the ones that you think are critical. And as we've been going through it this week, we think the 2 most important ones in the near term would be continuing the Holmes-Clinton corridor investments, and that strategic make the heart work, and the rest of it I think will start to take care of itself and generate. And then let's really bring life to the park. Let's use the City Hall opportunity to create completely different, no single-use buildings anymore. Please, if you're a city hall, you can be sitting on top of great shops and restaurants and other things that have a lot of activity in the bottom. So we think that that's a marvelous opportunity, and if those two things can happen within the next 5 years, then we think you might be ready to be at the parking garage in the Von Braun Center, beginning to deal with that as a sort of third initiative. So that's kind of the herky-jerky story with all the technical glitches. Thanks for your patience on that. But we'd like to hear from you a bit and chat with us. What we've got in the room just adjacent to us are a lot of these boards that are set up in stations. So one is dealing with the Clinton Gateway and the VBC. Others are dealing with the Holmes Clinton District and then the Fountain Circle. There's a whole thing in there on mobility and bike and pedestrian retrofits as well. So if you would be kind enough to spend some time with us, there are Post-its to write on. There are green dots for things you like, red dots for things you wish you'd never see again. And it would help us as we begin to fine-tune our work and begin to wind up our little bit of consultancy here to try to get this as a booster rocket into the next dimension. So thank you guys very much.